So this is the last talk, I think. Then after that, there will be, I've been told, inner church, a noise event, so a sound art performance. And tomorrow, all the galleries will still be open. So first, I wanted to thank Arda and Ander for gathering all of us, gathering all these components that we talked yesterday with Martin. This kind of event have to be built with components, meaning the art market that we have not to forget, that is very important. You will agree with me, I guess. Performances, live AV, talks, some of them academic, some of them more about the market or digital art. We are living a fantastic period of time, meaning by having artificial intelligence that is changing the world, and of course, the world of art. So we wanted, by talking together, to put what is happening right now, meaning everybody knows about digital art since 2021, but we will probably go back in the days because it's not that new, and but it's continuously evolving. We'll, of course, talk about AI, NFT, but we will start like in the late 60s. And but first of all, could you say a bit about what is on Hearst Dam Gallery Museum Prize?
Yes. Thank you very much. It's so great to be back in Istanbul. It's been, I think, 15 years, and I was first introduced to Istanbul, especially to the Borazan collection. This major collector, probably most of you know him, he came to my gallery in Berlin and we started a conversation and so on and so on. It went from there. I saw the collection, of course, in this building and so on. I came here, I took part in contemporary Istanbul. And since then, the situation has drastically changed in the digital field for digital arts. And as Dominique already mentioned, we are talking a little bit where we are coming from and the development of it. Just shortly, and I mean shortly, about myself and how I got involved. I got involved with digital art in '87 on the beach in Miami, where an artist was teaching at the School of Visual Arts, not at the beach, of course. He was teaching at the school in New York. And he introduced me to some of his pieces, which were done on Amiga Commodore in color. And he showed them to me, and I was really excited. I was working in the art field, I had not a clue, and I bought one right away. $200, it's still in good shape, it's still very good. He's not one of the big names anymore. He was even shown at MoMA at the time in the 90s, but he went into the commercial field. Anyway, so that was my introduction, and then I really searched into it, and I found that professionals as well as collectors or people didn't know about digital art in the 90s. And I didn't understand why. And it was really strange because it started in the 60s and obviously it was ignored by the art scene. So anyway, it took a while, as you can see. I'm still sitting here 30 years later, trying to explain to people what digital art is, where it's coming from, and what is happening there. What you see on the screen is my solution I found in the 90s, and it started in 2000, that I realized to really make people aware of the history of it. And of course, I couldn't start an own museum. I was a young gallerist. So I started an online museum. And that went online in 2000. It's still growing. It's a resource, so you can inform yourself about the history. There are interviews, there are essays, there's a timeline, there's a lot of information about the development of digital art. And after that, I started the commercial gallery in Berlin. I moved there from the west part of Germany, and I'm in Berlin since 20 years, and basically finance everything. And you mentioned an award. I have an award as well, a lifetime award, which is now giving again this year for major pioneers. I finance everything with the sales to my collectors and customers. So I'm not involved with any kind of sponsoring or anything like that. Not that I am against it, but sponsorship normally has some commitments as well. So I finance everything with my sales. And I still, after all this time, find it the most exciting field in the arts of today. And maybe we will go look into that in our conversation as well.
Yeah, and we talked about back and forth trends. Yesterday or the day before, we talked about avant-garde. By looking at it, we could think about kinetic art because it's moving, or optical art because it's black and white and all these details. One thing is interesting with digital art is that we haven't named it the same way for over like 60 years, because finally it started, let's say, after World War II. There are some people saying it's the 50s, the 60s. As a French guy, I would say possibly the 50s, thanks to Nicolas Schoeffer, who comes from not that far from here, from Hungary. And we established his studio in Paris and collaborated with a company, Philips. And this kind of collaboration at this period of time were very important because it was very difficult to access a research laboratory, a computer. It was not a computer, it was like a room of a computer. And it's interesting to mention that all the trends, movement in art, they are named from the very beginning to the very end. Minimal art, land art, conceptual art. We'll talk about conceptual art another way. But finally, about digital art, it comes from, I would say, electronic art, then art and computers, then art and technology, digital art. Now there are some people naming it the Web3 or the prompt art or the net art or etc. So finally, because digital art has always been connected to technologies and of course ideas, but always dependent of technologies, it evolved different ways, but it has roots. And I felt that it was interesting to mention what happened in the 60s. In the 60s, for me, three major events happened. And it happened in the UK, London, ICA, very important moment that you know. You showed me the catalog, the new version of the catalog, Cybernetic Serendipity by Zasha Rachar. And it was in London. And one more time, engineer presenting art or artist collaborating with engineer. But not that frequently artist alone. You will say the opposite, probably about coding. Yeah, yes and no. Yeah. And another very important moment, and there are many people knowing that in the room, is in New York, 9 performances, 9 evenings. We will talk about soon about sound art performance, performing in art. Then it initiated a group of artists and engineers. And one more time, it was about some major artists like Rauschenberg collaborating, the artist, the American artist, with Billy Clover, who was an engineer. And at this period of time, it was at Bell Companies. So it had to be some of this kind of collection. And on the West Coast was another event, more about art and companies. And you know, when a ministry, like in France, doesn't have that much money, they encourage curators to get some money where it is, meaning in companies. But finally, it's not that new idea. And Andy Warhol took advantage of the situation at the late 60s, West Coast, at the LACMA, and who was introduced to a company printing lenticular images. So he printed daisies and built a raining machine that I was very pleased to see in Tokyo because it was exhibited in Tokyo first. So this period was, my opinion, 2 trends or 2 ways to think about this art with some technologies, essentially electronic, but appeared code, and it was another matter. And I feel like you know more about art and coding than me.
A little bit. Yes. Maybe. Yes, we will find out.
This is your expertise.
Anyway, you mentioned a very interesting aspect, and which I, of course, looked much deeper into it. Just to give you a background, I basically know all the pioneers since the 60s, all the major pioneers. Many of them have passed away in the recent years because they are now rather old. One, the most successful woman in this field, Vera Molnar, she passed away in December, being 99. She started with the computer, working with the computer in '68, but just as a sideline. So I know these people, and I work with them since 20, 25 years. And the interesting aspect, what you mentioned about technology, and as well artists working with computer scientists, what they did at the beginning, because many of them didn't really learn how to program. They liked the idea of creating a kind of algorithm which creates a kind of concept, but they wanted to have this development, and of course to learn to code was a different story. So there was this combination, famous, some of them are very famous, and you mentioned Bell Labs, which was very important at the time. And then there were people which were purely in the technology field, many of the beginners, like Georg Nees or Frida Nake and so on, who tapped into creating some kind of art. And of course, they didn't have a background in art, no education. So the art was historically interesting in many cases, but I would say not that exciting. Maybe an exception is Frida Nake. He's a guy, you can imagine, he was studying mathematics, just a little side story, in the 60s. And the university suddenly had a pen plotter. This is his drawing machines at the time. So you could produce drawings based on the coding. And the professor came to him, a young guy, middle 20s, studying mathematics, and said, the professor said, "Don't you want to do something with it?" And he said, yes. And he started to program and create computer graphics. And it's fantastic. It was a wide range of art he created at the time, very unusual. And he's still successful. He's now 85 and he's still doing computer art. Even so, he taught his whole life computer science, and only since he's retired is teaching digital art. So that was the beginning story. We had this connection, and the first artists who started to get involved with computers is the aforementioned Vera Molnar. She was already a well-known artist at that time. And the other one is Manfred Mohr. Vera Molnar came from Hungary, lived in Paris at the time already. That was her big dream, and she always lived her life there. And Manfred Mohr, a German, started with a computer as well in Paris. It's crazy, they didn't know each other. Two people which became very influential started in Paris. Huh? Yeah. Good for you. And so they both had an artistic background, and they built on their artistic background, and they continue to work with a computer all this time, since the 1970s.
Yeah, and something happened in the 70s, I would say, and continued in the 80s, if we continue the chronology, which is a democratization. And I'm very, very attached to the idea of democratization. I would say that photography, of course, is very important in the 19th century, but what is more important is when Kodak said, you push the button, we take care of the rest, meaning a lot of people could take pictures. So, of course, a lot of artists emerged to this new possibility. And this is, I am feeling the same thing about AI. We have known many artists working with AI for decades. But the fact that every of us, we can use a service of AI, let's say Midjourney, and instantaneously getting something, and finally, by working with it, having a bit of knowledge of what it is. Of course, not the entire knowledge, but because it's a black box. So I feel like the idea of democratization in art is very important. It's yesterday or 2 days ago, I think it's Alain Servet talked about the tube, the color tube.
I have to say something about that.
Yes.
It is true that AI, and we are now jumping really in our times right now, because this is a topic which is all over in the last years, and I looked very much into that. And of course, I mean, since we have like this fantastic smartphones, everybody can take a decent photograph. Not always, maybe, but many times they look quite good. And then they use some filters, and it's exciting, right? But that doesn't mean we have more artists. And it's the same with AI. Many people, and I can tell you there are regular emails I'm getting of artists who introduce themselves and say how exciting they are, what fantastic stuff they did, and they work with AI, and they have this wonderful effects and so on. But beside everything else and all this technology, you need a vision as an artist. You need to have a vision. Something you need to want to communicate, and you need to develop an own kind of language. So if you look at AI stuff, an artist working, for example, with flowers, some doing it, it all looks quite similar because the effects are obvious and you have to, yeah, I don't want to go into it. But anyway, so that makes the major difference. And I'm just working on a show on AI or artists working with this tool, but trying to find artists who have developed an own kind of position and language and aesthetics. By the way, just quickly, one sentence now about going back. In these first 50 years or 60 years, there were not many artists who developed their own kind of position in the digital art field as well. I would think, seriously, less than 20. And there are some which have done sometimes a little bit for a short period. They did something for 2 or 3 years, did some interesting stuff, tapped into it for a while, and then disappeared again. But that's about democratization.
And thank you so much. And I wanted to add something. Even if I totally agree with you, I think that there is a German very important artist whose name is Joseph Beuys, who said we are all artists. But we know that it's not true. But the idea of being all artists, I wanted to tease you. So, and let's continue to go back and forth and say that something happened in the 70s and really the 80s that was very important, was the personal computer. So anybody at this period of time could try to do something. I remember my first drawing with a black and white software on a screen of like 200 pixels width. Okay, it wasn't beautiful art, but I mean, it was possible to do something. And there are some artists that are still referring to this style. But there is something that is also very important that we have to mention. And you told me when I sent you the first few ideas, oh, Dominique, have you forgotten 3D? So 3D is connected to personal computers because they're, at this time, computers were slightly smaller. And at this time, industry really was close to art. And I remember having, for example, at Ars Electronica, some movies from Hollywood having a prize in computer animation. So it was, I feel like sometimes art for the general audience, they rub shoulders with art for a tiny community. And you told me, let's not forget about talking about 3D animation, 3D in art. You told me that.
Now I have to fulfill it, right? Well, 3D, that was already, so the first people working in this field, they had to program everything. They had nothing, no basis they could start with. They had to program every step, and then the result was drawn or created on later on in the 80s on the screens. And when PCs came around, of course, possibilities were different. What I mentioned to you, when we spoke about it, there was one artist, and he's not really become successful. He's one of these artists who has been important for a while in the 80s, David M. He started to work with 3D software, and that was already not created all by him. He built on it and tried to create a series of artworks on this, and it actually has published a book. So if you look it up in the internet, you find David M, E-M, very easy to find, and he published this book, and that was a new aspect in the arts, and that he built on that his whole career, and he worked in this field for a very long time. But of course, we all know, I mean, 3D has then conquered the world. I mean, we have it in games and everything else, animation and so on. But that was the beginning in the 80s.
And thank you so much. You introduced me to Friedenacker, one of these pioneers. And I talked with him, and what fascinated me is that at this period of time, there are coders, many coders here. When you hit the button run with processing, you see the picture instantaneously. At this period of time, it was a matter of hours, possibly days. So they had to finally think about what could be the result. Like composers, they hear the music that they write. So at this, I would say that there are many bridges between all of these practices. And I wanted to mention the 90s about two trends. One is very important because now we are finally with the Web3, the third generation of internet artists. They don't call them internet artists, they call them NFT artists, for example. There were a second generation, but there were a first generation. And you know, many of them, Jody, you know them, and many of them. So I give you the net art.
Yeah, net art. Net art is an interesting thing. Some of you might have experienced it. I mean, the possibility for an artist to produce his artwork, put it online, and have a response in minutes, that changed the views. I remember at that time I tried a gallery in London in the 90s, and I spoke to many of these artists and I got to know them, and we spoke about it. I mean, that was fantastic. You had a direct response to the people who liked your work. You had an insider group and they accessed your work. They looked at it online. NetArt and Jody are the most, I mean, they were revolutionary. They are in the collection of MoMA, by the way, with some of their pieces and so on. Jody is a couple from, I think, Belgium, Netherlands, right? Yeah, a couple. And they made crazy things at the time. You went on their website and suddenly you lost control of your mouse. It was taken over by the program. Something happened, you thought your computer is disappearing. I mean, you had no influence anymore. So they were really very creative and very disruptive in this field. And they really were pioneers in net art. Others were maybe Vukovic and other people. So net art had this fantastic possibility, which we now experience to some degree again with the experienced, or still experienced with the NFT boom, because it felt like artists reached their final customer or interested people directly. But at that time, nothing sold. It was impossible to sell a website as a net art piece. No, that didn't happen. That only came about much later. After 2000, people like Raphael Rosendahl, he's probably one of the first ones who started to work only with websites and sold these and was successful with that. That happened after 2000, slowly.
Before mentioning the white cube that, my opinion, won, I'd like to mention, and I will give you the white cube because you have a white cube in Berlin. I'm going to talk a little bit about the black box, because finally we could also consider practices according to the context of the presentation, meaning the black box for immersion and frequently for also interactivity. During the 90s, there were a lot of artists, for example, a friend of mine that you know, Maurice Benayoun, who worked with this idea of immersion that nowadays is very, very trendy. In London, it's named Illuminaries. In the Netherlands, it's named Next. In Paris, it's named Atelier de Lumière. So immersion was a very, very important moment. And when Martin talked about Ars Electronica Centers, there is a deep, I don't remember the name of the deep, yeah, I wanted to mention the cave first, meaning at this period of time, it was possible to have a picture here, and possibly here and there. And there were a few artists trying to do that. It cost a fortune compared to now, but it was the first generation of immersive artists. And at this time also emerged two very important things. The 90s, I mean open hardware, thanks to guys like Arduino, the founder of Arduino, and open softwares, meaning open code, open Linux, open and etc. So it made possible to use sensors, and it was very interesting because the first generation of sensors, finally the first generation is, I would say, back to Nicolas Schoeffer, the 50s, a ballet on top of the Cité Radieuse de Marseille, and a robot reacting to the dancers. But it had to collaborate with the brand Philips, I mentioned that. But in the 90s, tiny elements were possibly used by some artists that were a little bit agile and not for a fortune. So it was very, very important. So most of these practices developed in the black box with a sense of theater, not that far from cinema. Immersion, interactivity, large screens, and most of the time using the video projector. So it was impossible to do that in a white room. But at this period of time, the market was finally essentially in some white cubes, meaning floor of that kind, and wall painted white like your gallery. But post-internet arrived, and finally, digital art entered the white cube. And it changed a lot of things during the 2000s, I think.
You spoke no longer about these immersive spaces, and who of you have gone to such a space? We're talking about these dark spaces, right? Where there's interactivity projected, in many cases generative software, where you can walk around, that it responds and so on. Who of you have tried it? Please raise your hand. Not that many that I thought. Okay.
Places in Montreal.
It is really, in the recent years, it has become a very big trend. And I don't want to talk too much about it because it's, from my side, a really very commercial trend who is oriented to reach a mainstream of public and get people involved, and they can do fantastic selfies and wonderful Instagram posts and so on and so on. But it is another indicator that digital media, digital aesthetics, and digital art has reached the mainstream. And that it's, especially for the younger generation, that is their medium. That's where they feel comfortable with and where they can connect to. Now, coming back to your question about post-internet art, just defining it a little bit for you, for the ones of you who are not so familiar with it. Post-internet art was coined by Marisa Olson, an artist as well, in 2007, and she meant contemporary, normal analog artists using or referring to digital aesthetics, which means they took this digital aesthetics from the internet and produced sculptures, for example. But the result was totally analog. So the result looked like normal, familiar with the traditional art market. And that really introduced digital aesthetics and digital art to some degree as well in the contemporary art market. And some of them are really, there's an artist like Oliver Larik, just to give you an example. He scanned sculptures and then he took them, he takes the parts of it, he produced in different media. It's probably hard to describe, and reproduced these sculptures in marble, plexiglass, wood, and whatever, and put them up again. So, but the result was a sculpture, a normal sculpture, so you didn't know where it was necessarily coming from. That was the first step to really open the art market. And then we went to the next step, and now it's up to you again.
Yeah, and it's interesting to mention that finally there are two ways of thinking, meaning the 90s and the net artists were moving towards the internet. While these kind of artists, Oliver Larik, for example, were more moving from the internet. There was an exhibition recently in Chicago. They were raised on the internet. There are many people that were literally raised in this room on the internet. The people who born in the 80s, I would say. So post-internet was more collecting ideas and shapes and forms into the internet, but to contextualize in the white cube. And I was saying that the context of the presentation of the artwork is also very important. But something that is also important to say in the context of noise is that, my opinion, the art market has always been a missing key component of all these trends, one after the other. Sometimes it works. Thank you so much. I love this one. And you know, Oliver Larik, with one of these kind of artworks, entered the collection of the Pompidou Art Center, even if recently they got a few NFTs. But I mean, at the Pompidou Center, like in all the major museum of modern and contemporary art, there are not that many immaterial artworks. But it comes from the internet, it comes from scanning, it comes from tons of technologies, and it can enter the museum. So it means finally this generation of post-internet artists were smart enough to continue to think digitally, but also, as you said, to present of an analogic way. So it changed really, for me, it's the first generation of artists that understood that without the art market, it might be difficult to enter history through the museum, thanks to the gallery. Because finally, tell me the truth, most of the major artists that enter the museum, it's frequently thanks to the art market and the galleries. And the art market and the galleries are everywhere. In Venice, it's run by the market. You're right. In Basel, of course, it's run by a market. So if I agree that as an artist, you can live out of it. But if you really want to live something, it's interesting to think the way to do it. And I'm talking about history, and there's something that I wanted to add about history and give you a point about it. Thanks to the technologies, we rediscover trends. I'm gonna make a connection, and I guess that you will have some more connection if you want. One connection, and connected to innovation, emergence. 2 days ago, Alain Servet was talking about the tube of color that pushed the artist out of the studio, and it was Impressionism. Of course, photography was also very important in this context. But I mean, at the end of 60s, back to the 60s, a camera emerged, and it was named by Sony, the Sony Portapac. So the first exhibitions of video art emerged, thanks to Nam Yoon Paik, that is on the website. And thanks to Bruce Nauman and Vito Acconci and many artists of that kind who were shooting video with a smaller camera, a more affordable camera in their studio than exhibiting on the art scene. And finally, this way to shoot yourself as an artist re-emerged thanks to YouTube, broadcast yourself. And I would mention Petra Cartwright, that decided to look at her computer. She was like 20, 25 years old, and to shoot herself by having some slice of pizzas and etc. As filters. So finally, Petra Cartwright, she knew it because she was a student at the Parsons, you mentioned the new school, New York. And there are bridges, and sometimes it takes like 1, 2, 3, 4 decades, but finally, I think that using digital technologies at the moment they emerge, there are many artists who finally reinvented. I should also mention, for the second generation of internet, Web 2, Amalia Ullman, that on Instagram made a performance that was named Excellencies and Perfection. And finally, she was kind of lying or pretending that she was like 20 years ago, Cindy Sherman was pretending she was a man, a woman, an older, and etc. So it's interesting to mention that a technology emerged, and there will be some artists using it and reinventing some trends. And by the way, nude was reinvented, landscape was reinvented thanks to Google and the plugins and the plugins, yeah. And it's interesting to mention that there is, my opinion, no trend in art that have this way reactivated trend of the past, but another way. What do you think about it? Yeah.
Totally right. I think we're slowly coming to an end and want to give you the possibility of asking questions if you like. Otherwise, we can go on. That's not a problem. But do you have any questions right now?
Yeah.
Yes?
Sorry.
There's one.
I just wanted to correct myself. I think you meant, I don't know what you were considering by saying there were fewer than 20 artists. Maybe you were mentioning pioneers and visionaries. Maybe, I don't know. But because it's like, even to become maybe a visionary person, you maybe have to escape some categorizations like being an artist or not being an artist. What do you think about that? That's what I wanted to ask you.
About being an artist and not being an artist, because I'm also a professor. I'm finally here as an art critic and a curator, but I earned my living all my life as a professor. And I'm used to saying my students, and we are many professors, I think I know. I've always said my student, you are who you say you are at the moment you say that. It's also true for a gallery owner. You open a gallery, you are a gallery owner when you say, I am a gallery owner. So I think that you are an artist at the moment you say that. It took me years before being able to say that. And finally, at the moment I was ready to say I'm an artist, I stopped to be an artist. But I mean, it's really... And there are professions like that. For example, a psychoanalyst, there is no diploma. You're a psychoanalyst when you're ready to say, I am. And as an artist, I mean in France, might have different rules. While for psychiatrists, there is a diploma. But I mean for artists, of course, there is a diploma of an art school, but it's not because you have spent like 5 years in an art school that you are an artist. Finally, you are when you're ready to say, I am. This is my opinion. When we consider pioneers, there are people that we can consider pioneers and not. And after that, there are circuits of validation. And it's not about being a great or non-great artist, a bankable or non-bankable, but as a matter of fact, art history is also a matter of validation. And there are circuits to validate, whether we want it or not. I mean, and we were talking about it, and I am always, as an artist a long time ago, and after that, as a guy trying to be in this world, I spent, I would say, too much time with my artist friend before understanding that the art world is made of components. And this is exactly what Arde and Anda want to do here, meaning by not forgetting the art market, the galleries, the collectors, the invited collectors, this is very important. Even if we can, for example, be an artist as a performer and say, oh, okay, I don't want to sell something. But all these components, theoretician, galleries, collectors, artists, critics, the audience, that is of course essential that we have not to forget. And finally, this is the audience that decides. I would say more than the collectors.
Did that answer your question?
Actually, I also wanted to take your opinion, because it's like what these kinds of conversations are also very important because the people which are creating, they are sometimes sensitive to be judged. Sensitive to be judged, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe for them it's the creation, even though some people are more creative or some are more influencing people in the vision perspective, they are still want to be in the cycle of being creative and you know, what you call an artist. That's why I wanted to ask you about this categorization.
Okay, I got your question. This is a very complex question because, first of all, the cultural scene and the art scene is very broad. There is not one scene. It's not like there is one institution which says, this is great, this is the only thing which is really serious art, the rest is shit. It's not true. It's a very, very broad field, and many aspects of art are reaching their public. And that means it works. You know, for a long time, graffiti was not accepted on the art market at all. But these people communicated to their community, And they had a community. And I know people from the graffiti scene, some of them have become even digital artists later on, and they communicated to their crowd, and they were stars in their crowd. That works. And if you look at the art world, and I look at this all the time, I mean, as a gallerist, it's a subjective decision in the end, who I represent and who I work with and who I think is good. But this is me. I don't think I'm the only one who can decide this. And the other aspect, what you're talking about, is, of course, this kind of components which make an artist or which make an artist successful. Yes, there is the gallery scene, there are curators, there are museums, they all contribute to it and make an artist successful. But I tell you, in history, if you look at it, there were always artists who were extremely successful in their time. And 100 years later, nobody knew them. So, I mean, it's fine to make good money. I totally agree. I wish every artist to make really good money. That's totally fine. But your importance culturally, or in the end, if you had something to do with your time, and if you really could develop something which affects maybe people 100 years or 200 years later, it's very hard to judge.
Yeah, and sorry.
But still, you never know at that period of time which influenced who, and then it's a cycle of an energy. So they are influencing others, and they produce something else, and then someone else is seeing. So again, even though if they are forgotten, and during that time, it's maybe not so important for that person who, if they influence somebody, or if they earned money off it, but they just produced. Yeah, that's also another aspect of it. Yeah.
And many artists lived like that. Yeah, any more questions?
Maybe yeah.
Thank you. By the way, thank you very much for this great conversation. My question is about the gatekeepers in the art world. We always talk about the gatekeepers in contemporary art, and how new media art is kind of liberating from those structures. But doesn't new media art also create its own gatekeepers? This is my question.
Of course.
I mean,
I can answer that quickly. I mean, look at the NFT boom. These NFTs, everybody who is not that familiar with, it's just a certificate on a blockchain, which certifies that you are the owner of a piece. It could be anything. It could be sneakers, yeah. But anyway, so the gatekeepers, and when you look at this development with NFTs, when they came about and they were promoted majorly in all the media, suddenly there were gatekeepers. Suddenly there were people, they said, I am the one who can decide what is really good in this field. And there, of course, there were a few, and some succeeded more than others. This will always happen. If I would trust them, that's a different story. I mean, you need to look who you choose, who your consultants are, who the people you believe in or you trust. But gatekeepers, they always try to be, as they say, gatekeepers, and decide what is the good and what is the bad ones.
Plus, there are chapels. I mean, sometimes there are chapels, meaning the Web3 trend generation. They organize events. I appreciate to go there and to meet them. But once I was asked, what do you do? I said, I'm interested in digital art. And he or she looked at me and said, you mean traditional art? Okay, I mean, I'm not that traditional, or I didn't, but finally for them I was. And there are chapels, and I like events of that kind that try to explode, get rid of the limits between chapels. Because I think that I'm used to saying, I love contemporary art to drink cold champagne, but I also love the open source scene to drink some warm beer. So I feel like sometimes it's not happening here and there, it's happening in between. And it's also happening when we people rub shoulders This is why I'm always happy to go to some dorkbot people doing strange things with electricity. Then a few minutes after, to take my bicycle in Paris and to go in a Web3 event where people have their own vocabulary, their own friends, their own platforms, their own community. And I feel like we were talking about layers of cultures, and now we can talk about chapels with gatekeepers here and there. And I feel like it's up to us to try to get rid of the limits. And this is why when you said contemporary and digital art, sometimes it looks like we're facing the other, like we are not the same. And this is why I think it was important to mention post-internet art, because it was a way to merge these trends. And I feel like whether we think it's interesting or not, NFT finally did something like that, because it injected new art collectors on the scene. And I feel like this probably some of the new collectors came from the traders and crypto and etc. But I am optimistic, and I feel like these new kind of collectors, probably after having spent years, they will develop their eyes and develop their relationship with art, and probably they will sometimes go out of their field. And I'm very optimistic about the fact that sometimes it's good to move from a chapel to another, and to forget about the gatekeepers and trying to infiltrate. There is a friend of mine is talking about poisoning. Sometimes it's good to poison the club that is aside yours, and to see what is happening is to shake it. And this is what NFT did, finally. Whether we like it or not, but this is why, finally, I'm interested in what is happening in NFT. I don't consider myself as a Web3 expert, organizer, collector, and blah, blah, blah. But it happens, and something happened in 2021. It looks like we're after the wave, but there is something that there will be some second and third wave, like we talked about the Web 1, the Web 2, and the Web 3. Yeah.
Any more questions?
So, I have 10 more questions for you, Wolf. But is there someone who wants to?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Just one final question, Dominique.
Yeah? Okay. So which one? Oh, yeah, I have one. Not about AI, because we have been interested in AI for and I have a question about prompt art. Yeah, you type in and boom. And sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's not. My opinion is that when you are an artist, because you said there are people that are or are not, and I agree with you. I was teasing you with Joseph Beuys. But I feel like it's easy to write a sentence and to get a picture. It's not that easy to evolve it, to modify it, to make it better. It's better if you have spent some time in museums to look at paintings or tiles and etc. to make it better because of your notion of composition, of colors and etc. So I feel like the first prompt, most of the time, it's not a beautiful picture. So what, according to you, it might change? Let's forget about democratization because we talked about it. I feel like NFT is a trend. AI in art with these prompt possibilities is more than an ephemeral trend.
Yeah, it will continue, of course. But I will answer it with another field. Because I was invited for a panel on AI, and prompting is a part of it, basically. And I spoke to a friend of mine. She works in the advertisement. And she has started a company which only works with AI. Meaning delivering commercials and advertisement only based on AI. And I went to see her and I said, listen, what is the difference between the good and the bad guys? How do you judge who is the person you want to work with and who is just testing it out? And I think this applies to the art field as well. And she said, it's the understanding and the references the person has. So I come back to what I said before about vision and really a concept, because if you are familiar with this field, if you are familiar with messages, if you are familiar with really a strong communication, you will probably create and in the end prompt better pictures because they are modified in the direction you want to go. You decide in the end. You will make a judgment which is good and which is bad. And that is based on your references. And I think that applies the same way on artists.
If I just would add a quick sentence about the reception by the public. It's also important not to promise some things that you're not sure that it will happen. I mean, if you look at AI history, there are what we call summer and winter. And usually winter, they happen after having promised something that will arrive very soon and majestic and wow, and it doesn't happen. So after that, there are 10 years of people saying, okay, we promised you some things that didn't happen. We're going back to our research laboratory to work on it. And I feel like it happened with the metaverse. I mean, there were a first generation of metaverse, and you remember that. You probably had some exhibition with some artists who exhibited in the first version or second version, meaning Second Life. It boomed and disappeared. And everybody recently said, oh, the metaverse you'll see with the Zuckerberg and blah, 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 it will change the world. Probably it will change the world. But I'm still waiting with my Oculus Google at my place to have a second life or third, I mean. So it's very important not to promise something that is not ready to happen. No? What do you think, Matt?
Okay, so if there are not any more questions, are there any?
Yeah, there is like Matt. Is there?
There's.
I mean, you guys sort of finished on this idea of novelty, but sort of anti-novelty, kind of how kind of self-portraiture comes back, like Petra Cartwright and Bruce Nauman drawing these kind of things, but that they're, you know, what was novel was the tools. And I bring that up because of one of the talks earlier a couple of days ago, and their discussion about kind of avant-garde. And I wonder, you know, they sort of left on this also the same note of kind of novelty and tools, and if that's what, you know, we keep kind of, like we're stuck in this loop. So I wonder, you know, is there, if you guys feel like, is there anything new in terms of the, if we get rid of the tools that we have, do you find that there are new communications, or is the communication kind of intrinsic about the tool in terms of art and technology? If we, you know, kind of talk about it like that. Is that a clear question, I hope?
I appreciate the idea of the tool, because I frequently say that we can consider, if we would use the word, let's say, digital art, we could consider digital as a tool, as a medium, but my opinion is probably the most interesting way to think about digital. That is a major matter in the society, because it changes the society the way it is. The webs, the social media, politically, we know it. We could consider also all these technologies as subject. So if we would go back to what said the collectors, I don't collect painting. I don't collect. But I mean, I by being interested in, let's say, digital art, I wouldn't have any problem to have at my place some painting considering the digital as a subject. Because I think that there are many artworks there where it's of course a tool, sometimes a medium that is very large, but it's also the subject. There are many artworks where finally it's definitely not only a matter of tool, and we can look to the digital with brushes and oil painting of a very innovative way, by forgetting by considering the innovation as an idea.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for inviting me.
Thank you, Val. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. And there is someone that I also want to thank. I don't see her, who is Beza, because we have talked every day, several times a day for 6 months to try to do the best we could to organize that. And I'm very happy because it happened. It still happened. And we are all together. And it's very, very pleasant to see that it's happening. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.